When I saw my baby's empty crib, something inside me stopped breathing. It's strange how silence can be the loudest thing in a room. That night it screamed. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the wind nudging the curtains. All of it faded when I saw that empty space where my daughter should have been. Her pink blanket, the one my sister had bought before she was even born, was crumpled at the edge of the mattress. The bottle I'd prepared an hour earlier had fallen on its side, leaking slowly onto the carpet. My knees buckled before my mind could catch up. I remember calling her name, Clara, though she was only 6 months old and couldn't possibly answer. Then I remember my husband's voice echoing down the hall, the slam of the front door as he ran outside into the night, and my own sobs, raw and animal, breaking the air that used to feel like home. That was the night my sister's secret came undone. But to understand the weight of that moment, the betrayal, the ache, the strange mercy that followed, you need to know what life was like before it all fell apart. Normal life. Set up before Clara, my world was small in the best way. We lived in a modest house in the suburbs, pale blue siding, a porch with chipped paint, and a front yard that always smelled faintly of lavender from the bush my mother planted before she passed. My husband Daniel worked long hours as a construction project manager, and I worked part-time from home as a freelance copy editor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. My sister Lila lived 20 minutes away. She was 4 years younger than me and had always been the spark to my steadiness, the one who could walk into a room and light it up with a laugh, who never left the house without lipstick or a story. Growing up, it was always Emily and Lila. We shared clothes, secrets, and a strange blend of rivalry and devotion. But somewhere along the years, that balance shifted. After our parents died, Lila's spark dimmed. She bounced between jobs, moved apartments often, dated the wrong kind of men. Still, she always came back home to me, to us, like a bird that couldn't quite stay in the sky. When I found out I was pregnant, she cried harder than I did. She said, "You're going to be the best mom, Em, and I'm going to be the cool aunt. Deal?" We pinky swore like we were kids again, and for the first time in years, it felt like the old us. When Clara arrived, all 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a squinty frown that looked suspiciously like Daniel's, Lila was at the hospital within hours. She brought a stuffed elephant, a bouquet of wildflowers, and tears that seemed too heavy for such a happy day. She held my daughter like she was holding something she'd lost long ago. In the months that followed, Lila became a fixture in our home. She'd pop by unannounced, carrying coffee or groceries, insisting she just happened to be in the area. She'd say things like, "You rest, sis. I've got her." And I'd watch her rock Clara gently, humming songs from our childhood. It was comforting, at first, because motherhood, in all its beauty, is also exhaustion disguised as devotion. I was still healing, still figuring out how to be someone's everything, so when Lila offered help, I took it with gratitude. She'd clean the bottles, fold laundry, or take Clara for a walk so I could shower in peace. Sometimes she'd stay late, cooking pasta and making Daniel laugh at the dinner table. We almost felt like a family of 4. But looking back, there were signs. The faint smell of alcohol masked with mint when she hugged me. The way her hands sometimes trembled as she fastened Clara's blanket. The way she'd disappear into the bathroom for longer than seemed normal. I noticed. I did. But I didn't want to see it, because seeing it would mean accepting that my sister, my only blood left in this world, might not be safe around my child. It started small. A day when she forgot Clara's feeding time, brushing it off with a laugh. Then another day when she showed up late, eyes red, saying she'd had a rough night. Daniel mentioned it once, gently. Maybe tell Lila to take a break. Not herself lately, but I snapped back. She's just helping. Don't make something out of nothing, because that's what denial sounds like. Defensive. Desperate. Protective. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Wednesday, one of those heavy, humid nights when the air sticks to your skin. Daniel was working late, and Lila had come over after dinner. We sat on the sofa, the baby monitor humming softly beside us. She poured us each a glass of wine, though I only took a few sips. I was still nursing and exhausted. She talked a lot that night, about how lonely she felt, how everyone else seemed to have moved on with their lives. Sometimes I look at you, Em, she said, swirling her wine, and I wonder if I'll ever have what you have, the house, the baby, the husband who actually comes home. I reached over and squeezed her hand. You will. You just have to give yourself time. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, time. I didn't realize that behind that smile she was already slipping. Sometime past midnight, after I'd put Clara down, I started feeling dizzy. I assumed it was fatigue or the wine, just exhaustion playing tricks. But the world tilted, and I remember clutching the wall as everything went black. The next thing I remember was Daniel's voice, panicked, calling my name. Then, "Where's Clara?" The words cut through my fog like a blade. I turned toward the crib. Empty. I screamed. The next hour was chaos. Daniel on the phone with the police, me stumbling through the house, calling for Lila, calling for my baby. Lila's car was gone. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By the time they found her, it was nearly 3 a.m. She was parked outside a nightclub downtown, music thumping in the background, Clara crying in the back seat. Lila was slumped over the wheel, not drunk, but high, disoriented, terrified. When Daniel brought Clara home, she wouldn't stop crying until I held her. Her little body shook against my chest, and I felt something break inside me, a mix of rage and heartbreak I can't fully name. Lila was taken into custody that night, and that's when the unraveling truly began. The morning after felt like waking up inside a nightmare I couldn't shake off. The police had already left, after taking statements and promising to contact us once Lila was processed. The house was eerily quiet except for Clara's faint whimpering from her bassinet. Every sound, the kettle boiling, the floorboards creaking, felt louder than it should. Daniel didn't speak much. He moved through the house with slow, measured steps, cleaning up the spilled milk from the night before, picking up the fallen baby bottle, sweeping up pieces of my sister's broken trust as if he could erase them. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. She could have killed her, Emily. I couldn't argue. I couldn't even cry. I just sat there holding Clara close, feeling the weight of her heartbeat against mine. I wanted to believe that my sister hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that it was a moment of madness, not malice. But that didn't change the fact that my baby had been in the back seat of a car, outside a club surrounded by noise and strangers, while her aunt was too high to remember she existed. When the detective called later that day, his tone was professional, almost rehearsed. "She's been charged with endangering the welfare of a child. We'll need you to come in to make a statement." I thanked him, my voice cracking. Lila's mugshot appeared online 2 days later. I didn't mean to look, but Daniel showed me, perhaps to make it real. Her eyes were swollen, her mascara smudged, and for the first time she looked small. Not my wild, beautiful sister, the one who used to sneak me into concerts or braid my hair before school, but someone lost. Someone broken. I told myself I'd never speak to her again, but grief has a way of softening edges you thought were made of steel. A week later, a letter came in the mail. Handwritten, shaky. It was from Lila. "M, I know there's no forgiveness for what I did. I don't even understand why I did it. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was helping. I was using again. Pills this time, not alcohol. I wanted to stop, but the withdrawal made me desperate. I thought if I could just feel normal for a night, I could come back to you and the baby and pretend I was okay. I'm so sorry. Please believe me. I didn't mean to hurt Clara. I love her. I love you. I'm going to rehab. I'll do anything to make this right. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in the drawer beside Clara's crib, and cried until my body gave out. The reaction. Action weeks passed. The investigation dragged on, and social services became involved. They needed to assess whether Clara's safety had been compromised. A woman from Child Protective Services came to our home, polite but probing. She asked questions that cut deep. How often my sister visited, whether we'd noticed any unusual behavior, whether I'd been drinking that night. Each answer felt like a confession. Because yes, I had seen the signs. And no, I hadn't stopped her. After she left, Daniel and I argued for the first time since the incident. You knew something was off, he said, pacing the living room. You just didn't want to see it. She's my sister, I shouted back, surprising even myself. What was I supposed to do, lock her out? Pretend she doesn't exist? You were supposed to protect our daughter. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. That night, he slept in the guest room. I stayed awake, watching Clara's chest rise and fall in the dim light. The rhythmic sound of her breathing became my only anchor. I promised her silently that nothing and no one would ever come between us again. A few days later, Lila's rehab counselor called. He said she'd checked herself into a 90-day inpatient program. He asked if I'd consider visiting. I almost said no. But something, maybe guilt, maybe love, pushed me to go. The rehab center was an hour outside the city, surrounded by pine trees and the faint scent of antiseptic. When I saw her sitting in that sterile room, wearing a gray sweatshirt and holding a paper cup of water, I didn't recognize her at first. She whispered, standing halfway, unsure if she should hug me. I didn't move. She sat back down, tears already streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix it. I wanted to feel close to her. I thought I could handle it, but I wasn't in my right mind. Please tell me she's okay. She's fine, I said. But she cries when I put her in the car now. Every time. Lila broke then, hands covering her face, shoulders shaking. It wasn't performative. It was raw. I wanted to hate her. I really did. But sitting across from her, all I saw was the same girl who used to patch up my scraped knees, who stayed up with me the night our father died, who always called me Emmy even when no one else did. Addiction had stolen her, but it hadn't erased her. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said softly. But I do want you to get better, she nodded, her voice breaking. I will. I swear, I will. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and I began therapy, marriage counseling, grief counseling, anything that could help us untangle the mess left behind. It wasn't easy. He struggled to forgive me for letting Lila so close. I struggled to forgive myself, but Clara kept us grounded. Her laugh, her tiny fingers gripping ours. She became the thread stitching us back together. One night, after putting her to bed, Daniel said quietly, "You know, I still think about that night. But I also think about how strong you've been since. Maybe that's what family is. Messy, painful, but worth fighting for." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how much I'd almost lost. Maybe, I said, protecting our family doesn't mean cutting everyone else out. Maybe it means learning where the lines are, he nodded. As long as those lines keep Clara safe. 3 months later, Lila came home. She'd completed rehab, attended every session, and even joined a support group. Her eyes were clearer, her smile gentler. She didn't ask to see Clara right away. She said she wanted to earn it. She started small, letters, short calls, occasional updates from her sponsor. Then, one afternoon, I invited her over for tea. When she arrived, she stood at the door like a guest, holding a small teddy bear. Her hands trembled. "May I?" she asked softly, pointing toward Clara, who was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by blocks. I nodded. Lila knelt down, her eyes welling up as Clara looked up at her curiously. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered. "It's Auntie Lila," Clara giggled, reaching out her little hand. It was the first time I'd seen my sister cry from joy, not shame. For the first time since that night, I allowed myself to breathe again. The news of what happened didn't stay private for long. Our town was small, the kind where everyone still reads the local paper and whispers over fences. Within a week of Lila's arrest, the headline appeared in bold, "Local woman arrested after taking infant to nightclub." They didn't name Clara, thank God, but the details were enough. People connected the dots. By the next Sunday, when I went to pick up groceries, I could feel the stares. The cashier avoided eye contact. A neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, leaned over her trolley and said softly, "You must be so embarrassed, dear. Family can be unpredictable." I nodded, smiled weakly, and left the shop before the tears came. Daniel suggested we move, at least for a while, to get away from the gossip. But I didn't want to run, not again. I'd spent months living in fear of what people might say, what they might think. Now I realized the only thing that mattered was how we faced it. Still, the judgment seeped in through cracks I didn't know existed. At church, people were kind. Too kind. They prayed for us aloud, using that soft tone reserved for tragedy. At the park, parents glanced at me as though I carried a shadow. Some even pulled their prams a little closer. That's when I began to understand that forgiveness isn't a one-time act. It's a slow, daily choice, not just for the person who wronged you, but for yourself. A few weeks later, the court hearing took place. I didn't want to go, but the prosecutor asked me to attend as a witness. I sat in the second row, clutching a small toy giraffe from Clara's stroller, a quiet reminder of what had almost been lost. When Lila walked in, she looked fragile but sober. Her hair was tied back neatly, her clothes plain. She glanced around the courtroom and then saw me. Our eyes met for the first time since rehab. I expected guilt in her gaze. Instead, I saw something deeper. Remorse, yes, but also a kind of surrender. She wasn't fighting anymore. Her lawyer spoke about her addiction, about the steps she'd taken toward recovery, the months of clean testing, the counseling, the steady employment she'd started through her rehab program. The judge listened, patient but stern. Then it was my turn. I stood, my hands trembling slightly. When the prosecutor asked, "Can you describe your relationship with the defendant before this incident?" I said, "She's my sister. She helped me raise my daughter. She's also the one who almost took her from me." There was a murmur in the courtroom. Lila's head dropped. The judge nodded solemnly. "Do you believe she's a danger to your child today?" The question hung heavy in the air. I looked at her. My sister. The girl who'd once carried me home from a playground fall, who'd sung lullabies to Clara before bedtime, who had lost herself to something stronger than she could control. I swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor. I believe she was sick. I believe she's trying to be well. But I also believe she should never be left unsupervised with my child again." It wasn't vengeance. It was a boundary. The judge agreed, sentencing her to community service and continued therapy under supervision. No prison, no more running. Just accountability. When it was over, Lila approached me outside the courtroom. She hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "For not destroying me," she said. "I would have understood if you had." I didn't answer. I just nodded, and for the first time I meant it when I said, "Take care of yourself." After that day, something shifted. People still talked, of course. But now, when they did, It wasn't just whispers of scandal, it was also admiration. I'd hear things like, "She stood by her sister, even after all that." The world loves a redemption story. They just rarely realize how much pain it costs to live one. Daniel began to soften too. He still kept a distance from Lila, but he no longer winced at her name. One night after Clara's first birthday, he said quietly, "You know, maybe your sister deserves a second chance." We all do sometimes. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a start. A few months later, Lila invited us to a small recovery event, a gathering for those who'd completed their first year of sobriety. I didn't want to go at first. It felt too soon. But when she called, her voice steady and hopeful, I knew I had to. The event was in a church basement. The smell of burnt coffee and cheap pastries filled the air. People stood in small groups, sharing stories of loss and healing. When Lila took the stage, her voice shook at first. "I used to think addiction was something that happened to weak people," she said. "But I've learned it happens to people in pain, people who don't know how to ask for help. The night I took my niece, I thought I was being helpful. I was high. I was selfish. I nearly destroyed the only family I had. But I'm here today because my sister didn't give up on me. She drew the line, but she didn't erase me." Her words pierced something inside me. I hadn't realized until then how much I'd needed to hear them. When she stepped off stage, she hugged me, tight, trembling, but real. "Thank you," she whispered again, and this time I said it back. "For trying." In the months that followed, Lila became part of our lives again, carefully, cautiously. She'd visit for Sunday lunches, bringing dessert and jokes that made Clara laugh until she hiccuped. She never stayed too late, never crossed boundaries. When she grew restless or overwhelmed, she'd call her sponsor before she called me. It wasn't the same as before, but maybe that was the point. Family isn't about going back to what was. It's about building what can be, with honesty, not illusion. I kept thinking about something my therapist once said. Forgiveness doesn't mean you trust someone again. It means you stop carrying their sin as your own. And slowly, I began to put it down, all of it, the guilt, the anger, the endless replay of that night. Because healing, I realized, isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. One summer evening, about a year later, we had a small barbecue in the backyard. The air was warm, filled with the scent of grilled corn and jasmine from the fence. Lila sat on the grass with Clara, blowing bubbles into the air. Daniel stood by the grill, humming softly to a tune on the radio. For a moment, I just watched them, my husband, my sister, my daughter, the three people who had been both my breaking point and my salvation. Lila caught my eye and smiled. Not the forced smile she used to wear when she was hiding something, but one that was open and real. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled back without fear. It's strange, the way life stitches itself back together after being torn open. Not neatly, not perfectly, but in quiet, uneven seams that somehow hold. A year after that night, our home finally felt like a place of peace again. Clara had just turned 2. She'd started stringing small words together, her favorite being "again," which she'd say every time we sang or blew bubbles. Daniel and I had learned to talk instead of tiptoe. There were still moments, flashes of memory, fragments of fear, but they didn't rule us anymore. We'd been through therapy, through silence, through the messy middle of forgiveness. Now we were learning to live with truth. Lila, too, had changed. Not overnight, not miraculously, but with each month of sobriety, she rebuilt small parts of herself. She found work at a local shelter, helping other women recovering from addiction. She moved into a small flat near the city and attended meetings 3 times a week. She never demanded trust. She earned it, one steady step at a time. One autumn afternoon, I visited her flat for the first time. It was small but warm, mismatched cushions, candles that smelled like cinnamon, and a photo of the three of us on the mantelpiece, me, Lila, and Clara, taken just a month earlier at the park. She brewed tea, the old-fashioned way, steeping it in a chipped teapot. When she handed me the cup, she said, "You know, Em, I used to think family meant never disappointing each other. But maybe it just means choosing each other even after you do." I looked at her, really looked. The shadows under her eyes had softened. Her hands no longer shook when she poured the tea. She looked grounded. "I think you're right," I said. "But choosing each other doesn't mean pretending nothing happened." She smiled faintly. "No, it means remembering and still showing up." That night, as I drove home, I thought about all the ways people talk about motherhood. The sleepless nights, the first smiles, the sacrifices. But no one talks about how it changes the way you love everyone else. Before Clara, I loved my sister with blind devotion. After Clara, I loved her with boundaries. Not because I loved her less, but because I finally understood what love without limits can cost. I used to think protecting my family meant keeping danger out. Now I know it also means keeping healing in. Months passed, seasons changed, and life in all its ordinariness became a gift again. Lila came over every Sunday. She'd bring a new recipe she wanted to try, and Daniel would pretend to critique her cooking like a TV judge. Clara adored her aunt. She'd run into her arms the moment she stepped through the door, shouting, "Auntie la!" The first time Clara stayed alone with Lila again, supervised at the park, I nearly backed out. I remember standing at the window, watching them walk away. Lila held Clara's little hand tightly, her head bowed as they crossed the street. I didn't breathe until I saw them return, laughing, with ice cream melting down Clara's fingers. When Lila handed her back to me, she whispered, "Thank you for trusting me. Even this much," and I said, "You earned it." She smiled, and in that small exchange, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't a doorway you walk through once. It's a garden you keep tending, even after the frost. A few months later, on the anniversary of that terrible night, I found myself sitting alone in Clara's room. She was asleep in her cot, her curls fanned out on her pillow, her tiny hand clutching that same pink blanket, the one Lila had given her before she was born. The moonlight cast soft shadows on the wall. I traced them absently, thinking about everything that had happened, the fear, the anger, the grief, the strange grace that followed. I realized then that if I'd cut Lila out completely, I might have kept my daughter safe, but I would have taught her that love ends where pain begins. And that isn't what I want her to learn. I want her to know that love can have boundaries and still be kind, that it can say no without turning into hate. Weeks later, Lila invited me to her one-year sobriety ceremony. I brought Clara, dressed in a yellow sundress and clutching a small flower she'd picked from the garden. When Lila's name was called, she walked up to the front of the hall with tears in her eyes. The crowd clapped, not loudly, but with a kind of reverence that only comes from shared struggle. She took the microphone and said, "A year ago, I almost destroyed my sister's trust. I thought my life was over, but today I'm alive, I'm sober, and I'm loved. Not because I deserve it, but because someone believed I could still be more than my mistakes." Then she looked right at me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't cry from hurt. I cried from pride. After the ceremony, we went for dinner. Me, Daniel, Lila, and Clara. Clara sat between us, dipping her fries in ketchup, oblivious to the history sitting around her. Lila leaned back, smiling softly. "You know, Em," she said, "I used to think that night ruined my life, but maybe it saved it." Daniel looked up, his tone gentle but firm. "You're the one who saved it, Lila. You made the choice." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yeah, but I wouldn't have if you both hadn't stood your ground. That night, when we dropped her home, she hugged us both. And it wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy. It was warm, the kind of embrace that says, "We're still here," the moral reflection. It's been 3 years since that night now. Clara is in preschool, full of curiosity and chaos. Lila has been sober for over 1,000 days. She volunteers at the rehab center that once saved her. Daniel and I still have our arguments about laundry, about bills, but never about love. Sometimes I still wake in the middle of the night and glance at Clara's bed, half expecting to find it empty. Trauma doesn't vanish, it just quiets down. But then she stirs, mumbles something in her sleep, and I remember, we survived. I survived. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that protecting your own doesn't mean shutting the world out. It means knowing who you can let in, and under what terms. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. You decide who has the key, and sometimes, if they prove they've changed, you hand it back. When I look back now, I can still see that empty crib, the one that nearly swallowed my breath that night. But I also see what came after, the long, slow healing that no one ever claps for. The quiet mornings, the forgiveness whispered in half sentences, the laughter that finally returned after so many days of silence. If I've learned anything, it's that life doesn't always give us neat stories. Sometimes the people who hurt us are the same ones we can't stop loving. Sometimes family means learning how to protect yourself and still leave the porch light on, just in case they find their way back home. I used to think forgiveness was something holy, something you gave to the other person. But now I know it's something you give to yourself, so you can stop bleeding from the same wound. When my sister took my baby that night, she took more than a child. She took the last bit of blind trust I had in the world. But over time, she gave me something else, the chance to understand what strength really looks like. Not shouting, not revenge, but standing tall in the storm and saying, "You will not break me, and I will not hate you," because hate is heavy. And I was tired of carrying it. If you're listening tonight, maybe you know someone like my sister. Maybe you've been betrayed, lied to, left in the dark by someone who was supposed to love you right. Maybe you've drawn your lines, built your walls, promised yourself never again. And maybe you're right too, but I want you to remember something. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you finally start loving in a way that's safe. Protect your peace, but don't let pain turn your heart to stone. Because sometimes the same hands that hurt you can still learn how to hold you gently again. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, when both of you are ready. So tell me, my friends, would you have forgiven your sister? Would you have opened the door again? Let me know what your heart says, down in the comments. And if my story touched you tonight, remember to stay, subscribe, and keep your light on for the ones you love. This is Emily, and this was my story. Thank you for listening.